Hell's Point, Part 11, Fire in the Dark. It was the biggest explosion I had ever seen in my life, like a giant red-orange mushroom cloud in the dark. I nearly flipped the car as I skidded to a halt about 1,300 feet down the road. The sound was like thunder shaking me awake from a dream. I didn't really want to go anywhere near that fiery death ball, but it was the only way into Shell Bay as far as I could tell, and I had to see if I could get around it or if I would have to finish this trip on foot. As I got closer, I could feel the heat rising up in waves, and the scene was like something out of a disaster movie. There was no way I was getting through this in a car. I could barely hear myself think over the sound of the fire. The wreckage of the train seemed to go on forever. Most of what I saw had already begun to disintegrate. I really didn't envy anyone trapped inside. Being burned alive would definitely not be my favorite way to go. As I skirted around the wreck, I spotted someone unconscious and alone. It was a woman. It'd been a long time since I'd seen or touched a woman. It's generally frowned upon for male convicts to come into contact with them, but this one looked like she needed help. I thought about leaving her there instead of wasting time trying to save her, but I couldn't help wondering what my mother would think if she were here. I let out a long, exasperated sigh. Shit, I said to myself as I ran over to the girl. Hey, wake up or you're gonna die, I yelled, shaking her violently. Her eyes snapped open, and she looked up at me, then sat bolt upright, looking around frantically. She turned back to me. Have you seen my husband, Jack? She screamed. Jack, where are you? I didn't have time for this crap. Taking her under one arm, I picked her up and carried her away from the fire. Dropping her on the side of the road, I put a hand out and motioned her to stay where she was. Calm down, I'll find him. She tried to stand, but I pushed her back down. She was quite a bit smaller than me, so it wasn't that difficult. Just stay there, I said, pointing at the ground. But my husband, he's in there somewhere. I have to. I cut her off short. Listen, lady, if you don't want to end up burning to death, just stay where you are, okay? She nodded silently as I turned to face the fire. I cut my hand to my mouth and called out into the dark. Jack, can you hear me? I didn't really think this guy would survive as I scanned through the scene, but then it was crazy that this girl survived. Jack, is there anyone out there? I called again. I turned back to the girl. Are you sure he's in there? He might already be gone for all we know. That was a mistake. The girl jumped up and started screaming hysterically. I know he's alive. He has to be. She looked like she was ready to jump into the fire and look for him. She tried to run towards what was left of the train, screaming her husband's name the whole time. Jack, where are you? She screamed, as I caught her in my arm and held her there. Listen, lady, you can't go in there. He's probably dead. But she wouldn't listen. She just kept screaming. Then suddenly off in the distance, I heard a voice. A man's voice. Diane, is that you? Where are you? Diane broke free of my grasp and started running, trying to find a way around the train. Jack, I can hear you. I'm here, she cried. This went on for about 5 minutes until finally Jack stopped calling back to her. Diane started to panic again and screamed even louder until she found an overturned train car and climbed it. I followed close behind and began to follow her up and over. When I was almost at the top, I saw them come out of nowhere, as if they had just faded in through the flames. More men in black cloaks and masks, one on the ground to my right, running towards me, and another on top of the overturned train car with a knife around this girl's throat. In the distance, I heard another explosion. Fuckers blew up my car, I thought to myself. I let go of my hold on the now burning train car and dropped to the ground, rolling on my good shoulder. The man in black on the ground ran towards me through the fire. He held an axe in one hand over his head and brought it down on me. Lunging upwards, I put my hand up to catch the handle of his axe and kicked him as hard as I could in the balls. Grunting in pain, the man fell to his knees and let go of the axe. "Fuck you!" I screamed as I swung the axe as hard as I could into the side of his head. He collapsed with a muffled scream, then lay silent on the road. When I looked up to where the other man had been, he was gone, and I was left standing alone in the remains of some fiery explosion, with only a corpse for company. But I wasn't going to stick around and see if anyone else showed up. I ran my ass off. It must have been about an hour later when I finally found what I had been looking for. The sign. It read Shell Bay, next right. It had been a hell of a couple of days. It'd be good to find a place to hide for a while, and leave all this craziness behind. People in mass trying to kill me, kidnapping people. What the hell did I walk into? I wondered silently. Not to mention that old lady back at the diner. As I rounded the last right before town, I was greeted by an eerie sight. On the crest of a hill, I looked down into the town that was Shell Bay and over the water that seemed to have a bridge connecting to the outlying islands. It was quiet. The whole thing reeked of too quiet, a place with secrets to hide. I couldn't quite make out what any of the buildings were in the distance, but I could smell the sea on the wind. I could still picture the girl in my mind, the fear in her eyes, as she silently mouthed the words, "Help me." But it was already too late. She was gone, and I had to worry about myself. That's the way it always had been. Always look out for number one. I pushed the thought of her out of my mind as I walked into the town through the fog. My mother would have been ashamed of me.